On the morning of February 16, 2026, London was preparing for what had been promoted as a historic and heartfelt tribute. At Sotheby's, one of the world's most prestigious auction houses, Lot 47A sat quietly in the catalog, a dark green 2006 Range Rover Vogue TD-V8, widely reported to have been one of Queen Elizabeth II's preferred personal vehicles during her private stays at Balmoral in Windsor. The announcement had generated intense interest. Royal watchers described it as a rare opportunity to connect with a tangible piece of the late monarch's private world. The proceeds, according to official messaging, were to benefit the Queen's Commonwealth Trust. The tone was respectful, the language was polished, the purpose, on the surface, was charitable. But just hours before bidding was scheduled to begin, something changed. The lot was withdrawn. No detailed explanation, no extended briefing, only a brief statement referencing recent developments and internal review. To the public, it seemed procedural. Auctions change, legalities happen, institutions adjust. But inside palace circles, observers began asking deeper questions. Why would a carefully planned tribute be halted at the last possible moment? What had shifted, legally, politically, or symbolically, in the final hours? And perhaps most importantly, who truly holds authority over Queen Elizabeth II's personal legacy? A car that meant more than a car. To understand why the withdrawal sparked such intrigue, one must understand the symbolism attached to that vehicle. Queen Elizabeth II was known for her affection for driving. At Balmoral especially, she was frequently photographed behind the wheel, headscarf tied neatly, hands steady on the steering wheel, navigating gravel paths without assistance. It was an image of independence that resonated deeply with the public. The Range Rover in question was not merely transportation, it represented autonomy. It symbolized a monarch who, even in her later years, maintained personal control over certain aspects of her life. Former aides have often described those moments at Balmoral as rare glimpses into her private character, practical, grounded, unpretentious. So when the vehicle was listed for sale, the reaction was emotional as much as curious. Was this a respectful tribute, or was it something more complicated? The legal question. Speculation intensified when reports emerged suggesting that the vehicle had not yet been formally reclassified as part of the institutional royal collection. This distinction is subtle but critical. Royal property exists in two categories: items held in trust for the crown, items belonging to the monarch's private estate. If the Range Rover remained part of Queen Elizabeth's private estate, its sale would require approval from designated estate executors. Observers began connecting dots. Had the necessary approvals been secured? Was the auction premature? Or had assumptions been made about authority? While no official details were released, palace correspondents noted that senior legal advisors were consulted in the days leading up to the withdrawal. That alone suggested the matter was not simply administrative, it was constitutional. The shadow of influence. Within royal commentary circles, a second layer of speculation began circulating. Since King Charles's coronation, Queen Camilla's household at Clarence House has operated with increasing autonomy. Her private office expanded its communications team, legacy initiatives were introduced, public engagement strategies evolved. None of this was unusual for a queen consort adjusting to her role. However, some commentators began noting the growing visibility of Camilla's extended family at select royal-adjacent events. Appearances at receptions, advisory mentions in ceremonial programs, increased proximity in official photography. Individually, these moments were unremarkable. Collectively, they suggested a shift in narrative positioning. When reports surfaced, unconfirmed but widely discussed, that a member of Camilla's family had expressed private interest in acquiring the Range Rover, speculation escalated. Would such a purchase have been philanthropic? Possibly. Would it have raised questions of optics? Undoubtedly. In monarchies, perception is power, and symbols matter. Catherine's quiet reputation. Amid the uncertainty, attention quietly turned toward another figure within the institution, Catherine, Princess of Wales. Catherine has long cultivated an image of steadiness and restraint. Her public role rarely intersects with institutional disputes, yet insiders often describe her as deeply attentive to protocol, especially when it involves Queen Elizabeth's memory. Royal analysts began suggesting that concerns about estate classification may have been raised from within Kensington Palace, not publicly, not confrontationally, but procedurally. One longtime observer of palace dynamics described it this way: "In this institution, the loudest statement is often a request for clarification. If such a request occurred, asking whether the sale had proper authorization, it would require formal legal review, and legal review can halt even the most carefully planned event." 3 interpretations. By the evening of February 16th, 3 competing interpretations dominated royal discourse. Interpretation 1: administrative oversight. The auction was announced before full legal reclassification was completed. Once discovered, it was responsibly paused. Interpretation 2: optics management. Concerns arose about public perception, particularly if any familial connections to potential buyers created uncomfortable headlines. Interpretation 3: internal tension. The incident revealed deeper differences in how senior royal households view stewardship of Elizabeth's legacy. No official statement confirmed any of these, but silence in royal institutions is rarely empty. It often signals negotiation. The power of symbolism. The Range Rover became more than a vehicle. It became a symbol of transition. Under Queen Elizabeth II, legacy was largely unquestioned. Authority was centralized. Trust was implicit. In the post-Elizabeth era, authority is more distributed. King Charles reigns. Queen Camilla operates her own household. The Prince and Princess of Wales prepare for the future. Princess Anne and Prince Edward maintain roles tied closely to estate matters. Multiple centers of influence now coexist within the monarchy. That does not mean division, but it does mean interpretation. And when legacy items surface, especially those deeply associated with the late Queen, interpretations can diverge. Is legacy best honored through public charity or preserved through institutional continuity? Both arguments carry merit, both evoke loyalty, but they are not identical philosophies. A moment of pause. In the end, the most significant outcome of February 16th was not scandal, it was pause. The vehicle remains in secure storage, no buyer was announced, no transfer occurred, but the episode revealed something subtle yet profound. The monarchy is navigating a generational recalibration. The certainty of a single guiding figure has given way to layered stewardship, and layered stewardship requires negotiation. What this means: the withdrawn auction may eventually fade from headlines, but its implications linger. It demonstrated that even in an institution built on hierarchy, symbolic assets can trigger complex conversations. It showed that legacy, once stable under a single monarch for 70 years, now passes through multiple guardians. And it reminded observers that within royal life, authority is not only exercised through titles, it is exercised through interpretation. As Britain continues adjusting to a post-Elizabeth monarchy, moments like this serve as quiet indicators of how power is evolving. Not explosively, not dramatically, but carefully. The Range Rover was never sold, yet in its stillness, it told a story. A story about memory, about stewardship, and about the delicate balance between honoring the past and shaping the future. And that story is only just beginning.
In the decades of Queen Elizabeth II's reign, palace insiders often referred to the monarchy simply as the firm. It was a term that suggested cohesion, a single, disciplined organism moving in quiet coordination. Decisions were centralized, messaging was unified, hierarchy was unquestioned. But in the years following her passing, observers have increasingly described a more layered structure emerging within the House of Windsor. Not fractured, not divided, but distinctly multi-centered. By early 2026, royal correspondents began speaking of 3 influential spheres operating within the institution: 3 courts, each with its own priorities, tone, and strategic rhythm. And the withdrawn Range Rover auction seemed to illuminate that structure more clearly than ever before. Clarence House, the court of narrative. At the center of the first sphere stands Clarence House, home to Queen Camilla's private office. Since the coronation, Camilla's role has steadily evolved. No longer simply a supporting figure, she occupies a defined and active position as queen consort. With that role has come an expansion of staff, communications strategy, and ceremonial oversight. Observers note that her household operates with a modern media sensibility, careful brand positioning, legacy initiatives, and increased visibility in charitable storytelling. This is not unusual. Every queen consort must shape her public identity. Yet, some analysts have observed a subtle recalibration in tone since 2024, a greater emphasis on narrative continuity, positioning Camilla not only as Charles's partner, but as an inheritor of institutional stewardship. The proposed Range Rover auction fit neatly into that framework, a personal artifact of Queen Elizabeth II, redirected toward charitable purpose, symbolically bridging one reign into the next. From a communications perspective, it was elegant, but elegance in theory can encounter complexity in practice, because legacy is not only about narrative, it is also about consent. Kensington Palace, the court of precedent. The second sphere operates from Kensington Palace, where the Prince and Princess of Wales maintain a more restrained but increasingly influential presence. William and Catherine have carefully cultivated a tone of continuity rooted in precedent. Their public messaging frequently emphasizes stability, duty, and respect for institutional processes. Insiders often describe Kensington's approach with a simple phrase: duty before display. While they rarely engage in public disagreement, their office is known for meticulous review of anything connected to Queen Elizabeth's historical footprint. Catherine, in particular, has developed a reputation for quiet attentiveness to symbolic matters. Royal analysts frequently highlight her long-standing bond with the late Queen and her sensitivity toward preserving that memory without commercialization. If procedural questions arose surrounding the Range Rover's classification, it would not surprise seasoned observers if those questions were initiated from within Kensington's advisory network. Not to block, not to confront, but to clarify. And in monarchy, clarification is power. The Estate Council, the moral anchor. The third sphere is less visible to the public but deeply significant within the institution. The estate executives, particularly Princess Anne and Prince Edward. As co-executors tied to aspects of Queen Elizabeth's private estate, their roles carry legal weight beyond ceremonial presence. Princess Anne has long been described as the monarchy's internal stabilizer, pragmatic, direct, and unsentimental when it comes to protocol. Prince Edward similarly maintains a low profile but steady influence in estate matters. Together, they represent continuity of guardianship over their mother's personal legacy. If any ambiguity existed regarding the Range Rover's status, crown asset, or private property, it would fall within their realm to review. Observers suggest that once estate oversight was formally invoked, the matter ceased being symbolic and became procedural, and procedure cannot be overridden by narrative. A meeting behind closed doors. On February 17th, the day after the auction was withdrawn, a confidential coordination meeting reportedly took place at St. James's Palace. Representatives from Clarence House, Kensington Palace, and estate administration were present. Officially, the agenda concerned upcoming spring engagements. Unofficially, it addressed the question lingering beneath the surface: how should Queen Elizabeth's personal artifacts be handled in the years ahead? According to royal correspondents familiar with palace rhythms, such meetings are rarely confrontational. They are structured, restrained, carefully worded. Yet insiders described this particular discussion as tense but controlled.
One proposal reportedly explored the concept of framing select Elizabeth-era items as continuity symbols, transitioning from one queen to another through curated public moments. It was an imaginative concept, but concept required consensus, and consensus on this occasion was not immediately reached. One participant allegedly remarked that stewardship must begin with transparency, not assumption. The conversation was tabled. No public acknowledgement followed, but those inside the palace understood something significant had occurred. For the first time since the coronation, the three courts had openly tested their boundaries. The optics of proximity. Beyond the auction itself, commentators began analyzing broader patterns. Over the previous 2 years, members of Queen Camilla's extended family had appeared with increasing frequency at public-facing events, charity receptions, commemorative services, advisory mentions in ceremonial programs. None of these appearances violated protocol, but in monarchy, visibility shapes perception. When proximity increases, interpretation follows. Some commentators framed it as natural integration, a queen consort embracing her full identity within public life. Others questioned whether informal proximity might gradually translate to perceived institutional standing. The Range Rover controversy amplified those discussions. If even a whisper of private acquisition interest existed, even if entirely innocent, the optics alone would demand scrutiny, and scrutiny invites pause. The nature of power after Elizabeth. Under Queen Elizabeth II, authority functioned with gravitational clarity. Her presence unified the institution. With her passing, that gravitational center dispersed. Not fractured, dispersed. King Charles reigns with constitutional authority. Queen Camilla shapes her own public mission. William and Catherine prepare for generational transition. Anne and Edward safeguard estate continuity. This distribution is natural in any evolving monarchy, but it requires coordination. The Range Rover episode exposed the complexity of that coordination. A symbol of one era collided with the priorities of another. Charitable intention met procedural caution. Narrative ambition met legal classification. And in that collision, the monarchy chose restraint. Silence as strategy. Perhaps the most fascinating element of the entire episode was what did not happen. There was no public dispute, no televised disagreement, no official reprimand, only silence. But royal silence is rarely passive. It is often strategic. Within 48 hours of the withdrawal, Sotheby's updated its catalog policies regarding royal provenance, emphasizing documented estate authorization for any future listings. Clarence House reduced media appearances temporarily. Kensington Palace maintained scheduled engagements without comment. The institution absorbed the tension without spectacle. That alone speaks volumes. A crown in transition. If February 16th revealed anything, it is this. The House of Windsor is not divided, but it is negotiating. Negotiating legacy, negotiating authority, negotiating the boundaries between personal memory and institutional stewardship. The Range Rover remains in secure storage, but its symbolic journey has already reshaped internal conversations. Royal historian commentary following the event described it as a minor incident with major implications. Because what was tested was not legality alone. It was alignment. Alignment between courts, alignment between generations, alignment between intention and execution, and alignment in monarchy is everything. The quiet realization. Perhaps the most telling observation came from a senior royal analyst who summarized the moment succinctly. The crown is stable, but the choreography is being rewritten. That choreography will define the next decade. Will legacy be curated through modern storytelling or preserved through rigid precedent? Can both coexist? The monarchy's future may depend on that balance. The Range Rover auction did not collapse the institution. It clarified it. It showed that symbolic power is shared.
that legacy has multiple guardians, and that even in a centuries-old monarchy, transition requires negotiation. 3 courts, 1 crown, and a future still unfolding.
When a monarch reigns for 70 years, legacy is not a collection of objects. It is an archive of identity. Every handwritten letter, every piece of jewelry, every vehicle driven across Scottish hills, each item carries narrative gravity. And when Queen Elizabeth II passed in September 2022, the legal machinery surrounding her private estate began moving quietly behind palace walls. Most of the public never sees this process, but it is meticulous, because there is a fundamental distinction in British constitutional tradition. There are assets of the crown, and there are possessions of the monarch. The difference is not symbolic, it is legal. Private estate versus institutional collection. The royal collection is one of the most significant art and artifact holdings in the world. It belongs not to the sovereign personally, but to the institution, held in trust for the nation. But Elizabeth II also maintained a private estate. This included personal gifts, privately purchased items, and objects that held sentimental value rather than constitutional value. When questions emerged about the 2006 Range Rover's classification, that distinction suddenly became critical. Was it crown property or private estate? If crown property, inclusion in a charity auction might have required only institutional approval. If private estate, the authority shifted, and that authority, by long-standing arrangement, rests with designated executors. The role of Princess Anne and Prince Edward. Princess Anne has often been described as the monarchy's most pragmatic figure, unadorned by theatrics, grounded in duty, relentlessly procedural. Prince Edward, similarly steady, operates with low-profile discipline. Together, they form part of the late Queen's estate oversight structure. Observers suggest that once estate classification concerns were formally raised, the matter passed into their realm, and estate oversight is not governed by public narrative, it is governed by documentation. If approval had not been formally recorded, the process would pause, not emotionally, not politically, simply procedurally. Royal analysts note that Anne's approach to legacy has always emphasized preservation over presentation. In her view, as many historians interpret, sentiment is safeguarded not by display but by integrity of process. If she intervened, it would not have been dramatic, it would have been decisive. The living legacy concept. In royal estate planning, there is often what advisors refer to as a living legacy framework, an internal philosophy guiding how personal artifacts transition from private possession into historical record. Some commentators speculate that Queen Elizabeth II may have structured her estate with particular sensitivity to how her personal belongings would be handled. Not every object is meant for exhibition. Not every artifact is intended for redistribution. Some items remain as archival anchors, preserved for future generations to study rather than purchase. If the Range Rover fell into that category, its auction would not merely be delayed, it would be inappropriate. And once such concerns enter formal record, the threshold for reversal becomes high. A quiet audit. Following the withdrawal of the auction lot, royal correspondents began reporting that internal reviews were underway regarding other Elizabeth-era personal assets, vehicles, clothing, private correspondence. The purpose of such reviews would not be scandal, it would be clarity. When a monarch's reign spans 70 decades, inventory is complex. Classification requires time. The Range Rover episode may have accelerated that process, not because it exposed wrongdoing, but because it exposed ambiguity. And ambiguity in monarchy is a risk. The institutional reflex. Institutions that survive centuries develop reflexes.
One of those reflexes is containment. After February 16th, the palace communications strategy was not defensive, it was minimal. No elaboration, no public debate, no extended explanation. That restraint suggests confidence in internal mechanisms. If the estate system functioned as designed, the withdrawal itself was the resolution. But it also revealed something subtle. The guardianship of Queen Elizabeth's memory is shared, not monopolized, and shared guardianship requires coordination. The emotional undercurrents. While legal frameworks govern estate matters, emotional undercurrents cannot be ignored. Elizabeth II was not merely sovereign, she was mother, grandmother, matriarch. For Princess Anne and Prince Edward, her belongings are not abstract artifacts, they are personal history. That perspective does not override legality, but it informs sensitivity. Royal historians often remind audiences that monarchies operate on dual tracks: constitutional authority, human connection. When those tracks intersect, decisions can become more complex. The Range Rover was a vehicle, but it was also memory, and memory, once dispersed, cannot be retrieved. The turning point. By late February 2026, the focus had shifted from auction logistics to structural questions. How should future Elizabeth-era personal artifacts be handled? Should a unified charter define classification? Should cross-household approval become mandatory for high-profile legacy items? Such discussions are not dramatic, but they are foundational. They define how a monarchy transitions from one era to the next, and in this case, the transition is still unfolding. The core question. Ultimately, Part 3 brings us to a central realization. The controversy was not about charity, it was about consent. Not legal consent alone, but institutional consent. In the post-Elizabeth monarchy, authority is layered. King Charles reigns, Queen Camilla operates her sphere, William and Catherine prepare for succession, Anne and Edward safeguard estate continuity. Each role carries legitimacy, but none operates in isolation. The Range Rover did not change hands, yet it changed the conversation because it reminded everyone involved that legacy is not inherited casually, it is inherited carefully. And carefully means collaboratively.
As February 2026 drew to a close, the Range Rover remained where it had been placed after Queen Elizabeth II's passing, secured, documented, and unmoved. No auction, no transfer, no ceremonial farewell. Yet within palace corridors, its stillness echoed, because what had been tested was not merely procedure, it was the direction of the monarchy itself. Catherine's expanding influence. Throughout the episode, one figure maintained visible calm: Catherine, Princess of Wales. She made no public statements, she issued no corrective remarks, but observers noticed a pattern. In the weeks following the auction withdrawal, Kensington Palace engagements subtly emphasized Elizabethan continuity. Visits to charities personally opened by the late Queen, archival tributes highlighting her decades of service, imagery that reinforced reverence without commercialization. Royal commentators interpreted this as strategic positioning, not confrontational, but foundational. Catherine's approach appears rooted in preservation through example. Rather than debating legacy, she embodies it, and embodiment can be more powerful than argument. The balance between modernization and memory. King Charles has long advocated modernization, a streamlined monarchy focused on efficiency and environmental advocacy. Queen Camilla has advanced literacy initiatives and expanded her public platform. These efforts are forward-looking, but forward motion must coexist with historical grounding. The Range Rover episode demonstrated the tension between those impulses. Modern storytelling seeks engagement. Historical stewardship seeks restraint. Neither is inherently wrong, but imbalance creates friction.
The monarchy's future depends on equilibrium. A generational bridge. William and Catherine represent the monarchy's next chapter. Their challenge is unique: to honor a 70-year reign without appearing frozen in nostalgia, to modernize without appearing dismissive, to unify without centralizing too abruptly. The estate questions raised in February may accelerate structural clarity for that transition. If a formalized legacy charter emerges, defining classification and oversight for future artifacts, it would provide stability, not only for Elizabeth's belongings, but for generations to come. The symbol that remains. The 2006 Range Rover may never return to public conversation. It may remain archived indefinitely, or it may one day appear in a carefully curated historical exhibit. But its significance now extends beyond its physical presence. It became a mirror reflecting how power is distributed in a post-Elizabeth monarchy, a mirror reflecting how symbolism must be managed collaboratively, and a mirror reflecting the reality that authority is evolving. The crown and the chain. One senior royal analyst described the moment with striking clarity. The crown remains secure, but the chain that binds its guardians is being reforged. That reforging is not crisis, it is recalibration. Every institution that survives centuries undergoes such moments. Moments when roles are clarified, when boundaries are tested, when process becomes paramount. The House of Windsor is navigating one of those moments now. The road ahead. In the years ahead, the monarchy will continue to face questions about relevance, transparency, and unity. But if February 2026 revealed anything, it is this: the institution possesses internal safeguards. Disagreements are absorbed without spectacle. Ambiguities are addressed without collapse. And legacy, above all, is treated with gravity. The Princess of Wales may increasingly serve as the emotional anchor for that gravity, not because she asserts dominance, but because she consistently aligns herself with continuity. In monarchy, perception shapes destiny, and steady perception builds trust. Final reflection. The Range Rover never crossed an auction block. It never carried a final hammer strike. But in its withdrawal, it told a story more compelling than any sale. A story about stewardship, about layered authority, about a monarchy learning how to function without its longest-serving sovereign. The vehicle remains still, yet the institution moves forward, carefully, deliberately, together, even when negotiating its own boundaries. And perhaps that is the quiet strength of the House of Windsor. Not perfection, not unanimity, but resilience. The road ahead remains unwritten, but if February was any indication, the guardians of legacy are paying close attention to the direction, and that attention may be the monarchy's greatest safeguard of all.